Hey guys, welcome back into the Out of Our Minds podcast. Now, I'm going to be honest, I'm having a very difficult time focusing on the task at hand here, which is literally just to record the intro to this episode because I am so giddy and excited. And you may be wondering, why are you so giddy and excited, Nikki? Today is November 7th, and today is the day that Bella lands in LA. Right after I record this intro, I am hopping in my car and picking up Bella from the airport. Now, if you don't know, Bella lives in Texas and I live in LA, which I'll actually be moving to Arizona in a few weeks. And we have not recorded in person together since the launch of this podcast. We have been doing it virtually and we haven't seen each other since the freaking summer. So we planned a whole week extravaganza together. Literally in our calendars, it says Bella and Nikki extravaganza. Tonight, we're going to a breathwork class. Sunday, we're going to a freaking sound bath overlooking the Pacific Ocean. We're going to eat burritos and we're going to have a freaking ball. Now, the thing that I'm most excited about is to record in-person episodes, but also to finish off our week of hanging out together. We're going to be hanging out with you guys at the live stream event. Now, a bunch of you guys have already bought your tickets to the live stream event. And if you are a ticket holder, know that we're going to be posting on our close friends list starting today. So get ready for that content. But if you haven't bought your ticket and you're not sure what this live stream event is, I'll drop you into some details on that right now. Monday, November 13th, we are going live at 6 p.m. PST, 9 p.m. EST. Now, this isn't just your normal live stream that you see on Instagram. This is going to be a full-on production. This is not only going to be us talking about the delulu and the woo-woo and all the things in between. This is going to be a very beautiful container of community. We're going to have a chat box. We're going to have an opportunity for you guys to call in questions. And essentially, we wanted you guys to feel people that are standing side by side with you as you are navigating this path. It is essential that when you are on this journey, you are putting yourself in rooms or communities of like-minded individuals so that you can start to really feel seen and heard with this path that you're navigating. I know for my journey specifically, when I started being a part of online communities, it was a freaking game changer. So Bella and I, we feel the presence of this community because we're getting the messages from you guys. We're hearing how much you're resonating with these episodes. But it's so important for you guys to also feel the presence of each person that is a part of this community. So you're going to be a part of a chat box. You're going to be chatting it up with people. You're going to be able to ask questions to us, or you can just listen, whatever it is that you want to do. It's going to be freaking amazing. It's going to be so much fun. We haven't released the topics of what we're going to talk about because we're only going to release them to the ticket holders. But the most exciting part about this live stream is that at the end of the live stream, we are going to be sharing with you guys our first ever offering. And it is only going to be open to the people that are attending the live stream event. This is freaking massive. I am so excited, and you're really going to feel the presence of this community, and it's going to light you the F up. I promise you that. So if you haven't bought your ticket yet, head down into the show notes. The link is there. Tickets are $18.99. You do not want to miss this. Oh, also, I forgot to say that once you are a ticket holder, you're going to be added to our close friends list where we're going to be sharing some unhinged exclusive content throughout our week with you guys. So that's also really freaking fun. Okay, so now for a more serious note, let's switch over into the intro of today's episode. If you guys are not aware, there is a massive shift in consciousness that is occurring amongst our collective right now. Literally the biggest shift in consciousness that anyone in our current population has ever experienced. This hasn't happened in the past 15,000 years. It is massive. Now, if you're hearing me say this and you're like, I don't even know what a shift in consciousness is, essentially it's people becoming more self-aware. You can think about almost like a robot looking at its hands and being like, whoa, I control this and I have programs and I can start to analyze the way that my mind works. Think about how cavemen used to live. They were not looking at their emotions and the way that their mind works the way that we do now. They were at a lower level of consciousness. We, in today's society, we have full-blown psychologists, the holistic psychologists with millions of followers of people who are wanting to learn how their mind works. It is freaking wild. We have become so self-aware, and we are going through a massive shift in self-awareness right now in this current time. Now, the way that evolution works is that we evolve through challenge. We evolve through darkness. This is literally the epitome of what an awakening journey is and what the dark night of the soul is. You go through some sort of challenge or darkness or chaotic chapter of your life that shakes you so much to the point where you must turn inwards to remember your truth. And this is what happens on a personal scale and a collective scale. So this can look different for everyone. Maybe you're remembering your power by being on a manifestation journey and realizing that you can actually play around with your energy and frequency and attract things into your life or to shift into new timelines based on just turning inwards and understanding how frequency and energy works. Maybe you are at a point in your journey where you're dealing with really heavy depression or anxiety or difficult emotions that you're understanding you can actually begin to observe, and that those emotions carry really deep wisdom and learnings for your path. Maybe you're at a point in your journey where you want to create a career where you can give back to the collective and be tapped into your purpose, and you're realizing that you can actually do that and you don't have to just subscribe to a way of living that isn't fulfilling anymore. There's all these different routes that we can take to awaken in our own personal journey, but the point of all of this is that this is now happening on a collective scale. We are realizing that we can actually turn inwards to remember our own divinity and start contributing to the creation of a reality that we all desire. Peace, unity, love, compassion, right? All of these beautiful forms of energy that can actually elevate us and unite us. So today's episode is going to be a discussion on how the darkness plays a very divine role in the evolution of our consciousness. We're going to talk about the different kinds of awakenings that you can experience. We're going to be exploring why darkness exists. And I think the biggest thing that I want you guys to take out of this episode is how it is we can begin to contribute to the formation of this heaven on earth that we all desire to live in. This is already happening right under our noses. There is a huge shift in consciousness that's happening, whether you see it or not. So to finish off this intro, I want to read you guys something that was written by my dear friend Sarah Zula that perfectly showcases everything you're about to listen to. So here we go. There is a massive change for the better happening on the planet right now. This change won't be on the news and it hasn't gone viral. And if you don't look for it, you won't even notice it's happening. This change is quietly happening in the hearts of humanity. People are realizing that we become what we focus our attention on, and we influence this reality based on who we become. So people are realizing that fighting is senseless and focusing on the chaos is futile. Rather, people are quietly focusing on creating their version of heaven on earth. They are healing themselves and focusing on creating more beauty. People have realized that awakening to their own divinity is what protects them from manipulation and allows them to become the change they want to see. It's sweeping through nations, but it's hard to notice. However, its strength is growing in numbers. Not strength in numbers to fight. Fighting only breeds more fighting. It's strength in numbers to create such a beautiful world that it will be obvious for others to join, to the point where one day they will hold a war and no one will come. The frequencies of war, greed, and manipulation will no longer be able to exist in a reality full of sovereign awakened beings living connected to their divinity. Whew, mic drop. Okay, so now you understand exactly what this episode's going to be about, and I really invite you to ponder how powerful we truly are in our own individual lives and everything we do on our healing journey and on our journey of expansion, and how that contributes to the heaven on earth that we're all building today. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. What's up, guys? I'm Nikki.
I'm Bella, and this is the Out of Our Minds podcast, a playground for mystics and self-explorers to journey through the vast realms of the universe, cultural landscapes, and spiritual expansion.
Join us weekly as we dive into thought-provoking discussions that unveil the mysteries of existence and nurture the growth of our consciousness. Okay, so I want to drop you into like this little aha moment I had. And I was going to make a TikTok on this. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to save it for the podcast. So I was reflecting back on my different stages of my awakening journey. And I remember when I first started understanding this path in a more, I shouldn't say logical way, but I was making sense of like what was actually happening. Mm-hmm. I started to understand that there's more than one awakening that you go through. Mm-hmm. And at the beginning of my journey, I just thought it was like you go through one major awakening and that's it. And I started to understand that there's many different kinds of awakenings that can occur on your path. And my mind almost started to categorize them into these two categories of an awakening that is triggered through. Okay, so let me backtrack for a little. My definition of what an awakening is when you are so deep and immersed in the darkness that you have no other option but to rise above it. And that rising above is literally you elevating your consciousness to a point where you're able to either see it in a new perspective, you're able to release some sort of outdated belief or something that was causing you to be so in the darkness. It's like literally being, I envision it being so stuck in, like you're stuck in the tar, you can't get out.
Mm-hmm.
That's like that dark night of the soul. And then the awakening comes when you realize that you can actually step out of it and start to see it from that higher state of consciousness. So I realized that there's two kinds of awakenings that can occur. And this is just me with theories, making up theories. Like this is not textbook stuff that I've learned. But there's an awakening that's occurring when you are so deep and exposed to a darkness that exists in the outer world, which is, you know what I'm going to talk about, going down the rabbit holes of understanding the intricacies of how like the government works, or maybe your awakening is realizing that big pharma is like a big scam. I shouldn't say that black and white, but it has parts of it that
yes.
Maybe it's you waking up to the fact that like there's chemicals in our water, like whatever it is. There's darkness that exists in the outer world. Maybe it's what's happening in the world right now, like all of this craziness and war. And then that causes us to feel so disempowered. And it brings us into this victim mentality where we think that life is happening to us. And I remember back in 2020 when everything was happening with COVID, I mean, I went deep into learning about what was happening. And it's hard to learn that information and not be so overtaken and taken over by it. I mean, and it's in that really dark place where you have to choose to rise above it and see it from a new lens. And that one category of like the outer world giving you the awakening is something that I think was my first big awakening. But then on my journey, I've had these other kinds of awakenings, which are dealing with my own inner darkness. So that's when someone is on a path where maybe they're so deep in their own darkness, and these can combine, they're not black and white, like you can experience both at the same time. But the awakening that occurs through the inner darkness is when you're so engulfed in your own emotions or your own thoughts or your own depression or anxiety. And you can still imagine the same visual, like stuck in the tar. And that dark night brings you into the depth of some kind of darkness. And then it's in that darkness where you say, I need to make a change. Like I have no other option but to see this in a new light. I have no other option but to let go of this belief that's causing me to feel so much pain. I have no other option but to create safety in my body instead of feeling so in fear all the time. And these two kinds of awakenings can happen multiple times in your life. Maybe the first one is the most painful because you're really seeing behind the veil for the first time, and it can kind of, it has the possibility to throw you into a fucking psychosis, right? Like being so exposed to the truth, if you're not ready to hear that, it can be a lot. But what is so empowering about this path is that when you choose to navigate the darkness from a place of, what is this teaching me? How can I evolve from this? It's crazy the way that we progress as a human race, right? When we approach darkness in that way. And it's also interesting to think about the things that go on in reality and how we can choose to relate to them in a different way. But do those two like categories make sense to you? How do you relate to those personally?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. I think those are a good summary of the two main ways that people experience awakening, or specifically a spiritual awakening. And I think that the one that's driven by
the external world is like a lot of people the catalyst to then have a spiritual awakening later on about themselves, because yeah, it's literally the moment that you get shaken out of a pattern that you've just been unconsciously in, like you finally step off the hamster wheel.
Right.
And it's can be painful because you're literally at the inflection point of saying, do I take the same step that I always take and just keep going down the repeated cycle? Or do I shift a little bit and start to explore this new world, which is scary and unknown, but like I'm sick of seeing the same shit? And I mean, literally, that's what's happening and has been happening on a micro and macro level is individuals having their inner awakening or their external one of just starting to see in a more clear manner. And then as a collective, we've been realizing that as like a collective organism, we can't keep repeating the same cycles. And I think that's what starts to help you appreciate the purposefulness of the darkness or the struggle or the suffering, is it is almost always the necessary catalyst to choosing a different route that will end up yielding more positively for everybody involved.
Right. Right. I'm curious. I want to ask you, what was the point in your journey where I know you went down a similar route to me where you were deep in learning about big pharma, learning about everything that is behind the veil with what occurred in 2020. What was it for you that got you to a certain point, or when was that certain point where you're like, I just need to choose to be happy? Like, I can't just keep myself so in the darkness.
Yeah, it started for me in around the first, what year was this? 2015, when I was in college, like my first freshman year in college, and then 2016 when like the election was happening. It was a very much like an information led awakening where I was uh learning about, I basically was just realizing how much bullshit is the elections and politics and how blindly people choose their, like who they're going to vote for and the parties that they associate with. And so it was not spiritual related at all because I didn't have my like personal spiritual awakening until years later, but it trained me to be very open to questioning everything basically.
Mm,
And it, I think, lifted the veil on the psychology of being asleep and just following the tribe blindly and just groupthink and like how ideas spread without people ever questioning them. And then because I had that like appetizer to the world of just, digging deeper into our government and society and medicine and whatever, like there was also a holistic health awakening that I experienced with learning about natural remedies and no longer being like freaking taking Tylenol and Advil for every goddamn thing that I felt. I realized that I could like heal myself effectively. And then years later, I think like COVID happened. And so I was like primed for questioning it already, which I think helped me to then not like, I think I had that experience of realizing how thick the darkness was. And I definitely at first it was like one of those, how is this possible? Like how is this happening? And nobody is realizing it. And how did we not see this coming? And all of those things. Like I definitely got sucked into that vortex. And then I think I had, probably because at the same time was my spiritual awakening, that the divine timing was me deciding to do something about it, meaning that that was the season of me learning to use my voice and be my authentic self and speak online and do whatever. And that's kind of how it was for me, was the spiritual one came at the perfect time so that I could actually do something about what I was upset with or what I was realizing was true.
right. It's like the outer awakening led you to an inner awakening.
Yeah. Or at least
Right.
they happened next to each other in perfect timing.
Right. Right. Yeah, it definitely is this fine line that we have to find of being aware, but not being identified with it.
Yes, right. Yeah, that's actually, I heard it. I was listening to something today about oh, this was in the Kymatica documentary that we were watching, which we can talk more about in a second, but he was saying how like people are very quick to, you know, denounce the Bible or say the Bible is everything or prove that this is the correct book of information. And he was like, it's all just information and it's all about what you do with it, which is another thing that I realized. And I think we were talking about this today was you can kind of very quickly fall into being overwhelmed and anxious by the new information you're learning. But definitely something that's helped me a lot and that I always like I tell this to like family members too who sometimes have a hard time with taking in new information is I'm like, it's just a data point and like you are in control of what it means or if it's like true or not. It's all about how you relate to the information because it's just data points. Like, yes, we have information overload, but it feels overloading because we don't know how to process it.
How do you feel like that affects people with the amount of information that we take in these days?
Well, I think people just panic and they're like, fuck, everything's fucked. I don't know what to do with this. Or we just ignore, or we
Yeah.
are like too overwhelmed that we don't do anything about it because, yeah, we're just overloaded. And so then our like channel and our vessel can't take it in and can't process it because we're also not being intentional about how we consume it.
Right. Right. I feel like the most powerful thing that we can all do, and I feel like sharing this message on this platform is super important, that what we've always talked about is like take in information, regulate yourself, and then choose to respond to it. Even think about for big pharma, for example. If you choose to, or let's think about the food industry instead. I feel like that's an easier example.
Mm-hmm.
If you are becoming aware of maybe how many chemicals are in our food and stuff, and the antibiotics that are in our meat, whatever
Mm-hmm.
avenue you want to go down, instead of freaking out and being like in this victim-y mentality of some big force out there is trying to like get us all sick, and
Yeah.
instead of that avenue, let's regulate ourselves and realize that we have the choice to choose
Right.
and become aware. And then great, that's the data point that you use to then empower yourself. I feel like the disconnect between us being exposed to the outer darkness and actually utilizing it to awaken is when we pick up on that data, we really need to calm ourselves and then realize that we have a choice as to
Yes.
what we want to subscribe to.
Yeah. I think this is exactly the larger theme and pattern that we wanted to speak to of why we were inspired to do an episode on this. And Nikki found this documentary called Kymatica that talks about, it's basically like explaining in a certain perspective why bad things happen, to put it simply, and what to do about it and what our role is in it. And I'm thinking of this now with what you just said because we're at like an inflection point where there's always going to be something that comes up because we're evolving as a species. And so whether it's us learning about shit, someone's been messing up the food and like there's no nutrients in the soil and they put neurotoxins in the water, like whatever it is, that every time it's the opportunity to say, okay, new piece of information or new evidence of suffering. What do I do with it? And this is the choice. Like, this is the predicament that we're in as a collective is we're going to continue to see or learn about more aspects of ourselves, our shadows, or more instances of evil, darkness, suffering in the world. And the question is literally like, how do we evolve and keep spiraling upward versus just going around in a circle again and again and again? It's what happens on your individual level of your soul, and the universe is going to keep presenting you with the same freaking lesson until you understand it and alchemize it. That's what's happening on the collective level. And that's
Right.
why it feels helpless, is because we're from the outside looking in, repeating the cycles without bringing the higher consciousness into it, which is what will help us transmute and move on.
Yeah. I mean, whose famous quote is it? Einstein, that you can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness that created it.
Yes.
So in order to ever solve a problem, we have to rise above it and start asking, how can we begin to see this differently? And I almost see everything that's happening as just like the karmic fucking loop that's happening in the collective.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked what you described with this documentary of how they took humanity and put that as like the microorganisms of the organism of Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Could you drop us into a little bit around that?
Yeah. So we've talked about oneness a lot on this podcast, and basically this is like a thought experiment to delve into, and I have personally found it very helpful, and it's also felt very true in my body. Nikki and I will talk about how something feels when we say it as a metric for its truthfulness or its relevance. And knowing what we know about ourselves and patterns in the universe, there's this concept that we are all one, ONE. We are all one organism. And like any organism, it has atoms that are part of it. It has different organs. We have different limbs. We have these, like, quote unquote, sections of ourselves that we can separate for a second and look at individually. But then on the macro scale, you zoom out and there is evidence. This is like a scientific, biological physics truth as well, is that we are one connected organism. And to look at the world and what we're going through from that perspective starts to put together certain puzzle pieces for how to make meaning and how to understand what's going on, and then to say, okay, how do we evolve past it? So for yourself, you would have your awakening journey and you would start to self explore and journal and look at your shadows. And you would say, okay, there is this part of me that is driven by the ego. And there's this parasite within me, let's call it, that I have been feeding unconsciously for years by either ignoring it and not giving it the attention it needs in order to be healed or released or shed, or just by not really even realizing that it's there. And in your own self-discovery journey, like, this is the shadow work or the practice of compassion for your ego or for your faults, whatever it is. And if you then extrapolate that out to the whole of humanity and say, we are literally one large organism that has the false perception of being separate, that as a collective, we are going through a process of coming face to face with our shadows and with the parts of us that we do not like and that are harmful and not in the best interest of the organism as a whole. And every time, I have such intense chills right now explaining this.
You're doing a really good job. I'm like, yes, yes.
Thank you. As we come literally face to face with a new iteration of evil or suffering or darkness or an action that hurts us, makes us sad or angry or upset, there is the phase of being angry, being upset, feeling the emotion. And then there's the phase that says, okay, if I sustain this emotion, I actually stay at the same level, because anger and hatred and fear can really only hold so much. If you think about them from a density perspective, like, they're really hard and they're
They're
dense and they're
dense and
full.
3D, like
Right. And
very
stuck.
matrixy.
Yes. Right. They're like hard. Right. And so there's a reason why when shit happens around the world and people end up feeding into the anger, the frustration, the fear, the same emotions that are driving the people who are doing terrible acts and who are causing suffering, you're feeding into that reality. And so, again, it's to feel those emotions, understand them and where they're coming from, and then The challenge is to say, what if I challenge myself to feel compassion and forgiveness for this part? And it's really fucking hard. And this is why people are like, oh, forgiveness and compassion, it's weak. Like Gabor Mate says, if you no, Desmond Tutu said in this Dalai Lama documentary we watched called Mission Joy, he was like, people who think forgiveness is weak clearly have not tried it, because it is so bloody hard to put your ego aside and to look at another human being who is literally like done fucked up shit or is abusing you or whatever. Like, this is very difficult, and it's something that I think all humans are tasked with trying to do, because the ability to forgive and feel compassion basically is rooted in this idea that because we're one and we all have this life force in us, like, all humans are seeking the same thing. They just do it in very weird different ways depending on how lost or whatever their karmic cycle is, or whatever the frick their insane life experience is that causes them to inflict suffering on someone else. Ultimately, that human is hurting, and that is the challenge. The incredibly hard lifelong challenge is to find compassion. And the last example I'll give, and then I want to hear your input on all this, is I was watching an interview with Gabor Mate, and he was talking about someone that he met who was in a concentration or like imprisonment camp of some kind. And he was telling Gabor, it was really dangerous time for me. It was pretty scary. I was facing a lot of dangers. And Gabor said, "What kind of dangers did you face?" And he said, "The danger of losing compassion for my perpetrator." And when he said that, I was like, wow,
Whoa.
like, that is a perspective that hits the nail on the head to show you, like, this is what we're talking about. It's like recognizing the darkness, but then saying, what would happen as a collective if we had the strength to see it from a higher perspective, whether that's compassion or love or just whatever. Like, it's so hard, and it sometimes feels wrong because we're so conditioned to feed into the fear.
Right. And I think it's also important to note that we have the privilege of being kind of, I shouldn't say displaced from the, what's a good way to put this? There are some souls that are still navigating survival
Mm-hmm.
and that are still learning lessons of survival.
Yeah.
We are very blessed to be living the lives that we are living.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that privilege needs to be acknowledged, and we need to utilize that privilege to do that practice of what you are talking about.
Right.
The fact that we are safe with a roof over our heads and food on our plates, like, sometimes it confuses me of how we can get so stuck in the darkness
Mm-hmm.
when we actually have such a privilege of having the space to really do this work of tapping into our light.
Right. Yeah. And I think ultimately, or at least this is what I've observed in people who are really powerful spiritual leaders who have also been through a lot of suffering and witnessed it firsthand, is like with the documentary with Desmond Tutu and Dalai Lama. If anyone doesn't know Desmond Tutu, he was a leader in bringing down apartheid in South Africa. And apartheid was basically like a time when there was intense segregation and also retaliation basically against the black people in South Africa. And there's a lot of violence and like families ripped apart, like really, really horrible. And him and Dalai Lama are really good friends. And they have this beautiful friendship where they're like kids, like they're giggling and laughing all the time. They also like hold hands all the time. Like, it's actually the cutest thing ever. And the Dalai Lama has also been through his own suffering with being exiled from Tibet, and Tibet being invaded by the Chinese. And war and like the similar, sort of historical experience to Desmond Tutu. And they both talk about how important compassion is, and even compassion toward the people who wronged them. And it always strikes me when I hear people talk about that, whether it's like Viktor Frankl and his experience in the Nazi camps, or right? Is that correct? I'm
Yeah, the
pretty
guy
sure
that
that's
wrote what's
yeah,
it called?
Man's Search for Meaning.
Yes, sorry,
Yeah.
Man's Search Meaning. Yep.
But yeah, I'm just always really inspired by people like that who are so wise and embodied, and to this day are able to say ultimately the solution here is to find more ways to have compassion. And maybe that starts with just compassion towards the people who are clearly suffering or affected by it, and to pull yourself out of the black and white narrative of like the politics that's like, no, this group deserves this and this one needs retaliation and whatever. And like, again, this isn't even really a conversation about that because that's not my world, and I don't find that world to be personally productive. This is this is advocating for challenging ourselves to choose compassion and love, even when in like an intense, passionate way, which I think
Right.
is where it's not bypassing to just be like, la di da, like everything's fine, you're fine, forgiveness here and there. Like, no, I think you actually really have to face the shadow and the darkness to understand what it means to choose compassion at the end of the day.
Yeah, that was really beautiful. That gave me such a clear picture of us as this whole. And I'm thinking more about this topic of compassion. And I think the day after I went to that concert where I called you, and I was like having all these realizations about compassion. And when you think about it in an evolutionary way, we evolve as we become more conscious, right? And essentially consciousness is just love when you're tapped into that love. And if you're thinking about it, let's say you're sitting next to someone and you want them to be able to evolve, and they're coming to you with a problem that they have. You shifting into the vibration of love for that person, which is therefore compassion, and just even being in that energy allows them to feel safe enough to explore the parts of them that may be causing unnecessary darkness or suffering, or it gives them an opportunity to also shift in consciousness and shift in awareness. So there's different levels of this that I can talk about, but essentially also on a subconscious level, I think I've shared this with you, but the subconscious needs to feel safe in order for us to become aware of certain programs that we hold. If we're always in lower vibrations and holding on to that energy and resisting the healing process, we're not going to be able to see above and feel into the way that our mind works or become aware of certain programs. So even just working with a coach, for example, is so powerful because they give you that container to feel seen and held. And then you're giving someone the opportunity to become aware in different ways just by giving them love and compassion. So I think where we all can start to integrate this into our life, when you're sitting across from someone and you're noticing that they're struggling or they're sharing something with you, it is not our responsibility to go in and save someone and to fear for their life or to think that you need to push your ideas or your way of thinking onto that person. And I actually recovered an old Instagram post that I wanted to read off on this topic that I wrote, I think like a year ago. That has to do with how we can like help each other evolve just through love for each other. So I wrote, "It is not your responsibility to fix, save, or rescue someone. It is easy to fall into the trap of thinking we need to swoop in and save someone on their journey, telling them what we think they need to do or have to do, especially when we care deeply for this person. This behavior usually is learned in childhood through specific experiences where we decided it was our role to fix and save others. This belief that we must save and fix others can negatively impact our ability to show up as our highest in this world. we will begin to take on the suffering of another as our own, and we will feel their pain and emotions as our own. This will leave us drained from our own energy, where we will eventually be no help to anyone. In an effort to fix, we are also trying to control that which we cannot control, which will only lead to more of our own inner suffering. Trying to save another will be met with more resistance and eventually resentment from that person. Force will be met with an equal and opposite force. What could be thought of as help from us can actually be deterring someone from their journey and also your relationship with them. Every challenge and hardship one experiences as specific medicine, specific lessons, specific teachings that are meant for their journey of soul expansion. Allowing others to navigate their journey is what allows them to stand in their power and to also receive each teaching to its fullest. So how can we provide support for another if we are desiring to? First, we get to understand that every single soul is just as strong, capable, complete, and perfect as the next. Instead of seeing them for their pain, see them as a limitless, powerful soul that is simply experiencing a challenge. No one needs saving or fixing from their soul's journey. If we do have the capacity to support another, we can do this by providing them the space to be exactly who they are, to feel exactly what they feel, to express exactly what wants to be expressed. We get to show up in our highest and simply provide love. By standing in our state of love, we act as a mirror for the already existing perfection and love that is within them. By seeing them in their power, we are also able to mirror back the strength that is existing within them. Giving others the space to navigate and learn through their own journey while acting as a mirror for their own inner power is the greatest act of service one can give. While the force of trying to save another will only be met with more resistance and resentment, the love of simply supporting another will be met with more love. Yeah, I wrote that 41 weeks ago, and I think you actually commented on it. You said,
Really?
You said, I vividly remember going through this experience and coming out on the other side with the realization that respecting everyone's path is divine.
Boom. There you go. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I really resonate with that. It was something I definitely went through in like the 2020, 2021 era, was like the frustration of trying to like help people see and put my perspective onto them, and then realizing it was so futile. I was like, this is not how it goes. Like, this is not helpful.
And if you are very passionate about making a change and helping others, then regulate yourself, calm yourself, and then put your whole freaking heart into a mission. Like, pick one mission and go all in on it. If you're really dedicated to helping an individual, which I feel like at our core, that's literally what we all find fulfillment and love from, is helping each other, then pick one act of service that just fucking fills your heart up, that you feel so passionate about, and go for it, right? But we can't do that from that anger. We have to really return back to our power, because when we're in the angry place, we're not going to be helping anyone.
Yeah, and again, it's what feeds the demon, so to speak, is like, that's what feeds it. And there's a couple lines from the Kymatica documentary that really stuck out to me, and one of them was this was in reference to basically like people who are committing the dark acts, or are like people always reference like the powers that be, basically. And he said, without supplying them with the sustenance of complicity, they starve.
Yes. Tell me more.
Like, dude, okay. This was the part of the documentary. I really want to hear what your epiphanies were off of this, if any, because it was really clicking for me. It's a topic that there's this kind of like field of study or thought, if you will, about our relationship to the powers that be, basically, which is a term that I've definitely used, and something that I've like imagined as like the people up there like pulling the strings and whatever.
Yeah.
And we kind of don't realize or think about what that means in terms of how we are complicit in it. And this is a topic that Alex Zek talks about. We referenced him a couple times on the podcast. He's health freedom advocate. He has a podcast called The Way Forward. And if you like this topic, he's really deep in it, and I want to have him on the show to talk about it, because he's all about challenging this idea that there's like an us versus them, and that like they are going to do this and it's because of them that this is happening to us. And he talks all about this idea that like when we play into that dynamic, we're feeding it as if it's literally a parasite in our collective organism that is trying to exert power over the other, atoms, the other like parts of the organism, that we feed it with anger and frustration and fear. That's what it freaking lives off of. And when you think about like how the mainstream media works and how like propaganda machines function, they want you to be in fear and to be frustrated and confused and divided. And it's lucrative as fuck. Like being separated and angry and pissed at each other is what makes them then come in with their little agendas to be like, I'm going to fix this division and I'm going to blah, 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 blah. And my side is correct. Like,
but you're still saying they in this. So this is where we need to get into the language too, because even saying them, they want us to feel this way. Who's they?
Well, okay. So this is why there's this stage of seeing it as like there are actual people who have these bad intentions, but to then say that you basically opt out of the game and you choose to be your own authority and your own power. And so that's where you would stop. You unsubscribe. You literally say like, instead of basically the next time, we were kind of talking about this in the like initial darkness episode as it related to COVID. And we were like, okay, let's say another like lockdown comes or whatever. This thing that Alex Zek, for example, will explain is if they were to come out and say, everybody stay in your house and there's this thing and whatever. And let's say we assume that the threat is maybe not real in the end, that the reason they, again, quote unquote, they have the power is because we are complicit in giving them the power. So it's recognizing that what feeds that, basically that it dissolves the second that everybody remembers we're inherently free. So to explain it, I'm like using they, because there is like in our collective, there are people who want to exert power over others, but we help them be successful when we're complicit in it and when we play into the dynamic that they have power over us. But the remembrance is to come back to the truth that you are free by virtue of existing and that you are your own inner authority. And that's why it relates to not like feeding into the anger and the division of the next political cycle, of the next news, drama or whatever.
This is kind of the same journey I went through with the anxiety I had. At one point I was like, damn, this is probably just like who I am. And I was about to go get medicated. And I remember I had these conversations with my parents, like, I think I need to see a psychiatrist. This is getting so bad. And then there was this one day where I was like, am I going to be a victim to this, like, quote unquote, mental illness? And I do understand that there are people whose brains are wired in specific ways. Mm-hmm. But
for you,
I'm really like, I had to choose to gain my power back over my own darkness. Mm-hmm. And if I would have like continued to battle it and fight it, I don't think I would have won. And I had to take myself out of the battle and be like, I could just be with this and it doesn't have to mean anything about me. And I can just experience this energy and be friends with it and we're chill and it's fine. And I've just learned to have this really beautiful relationship to the darkness that is within me in a way that I'm not ignoring it or bypassing it. And I think this relates beautifully to what you're saying too. It's like, as soon as we're in the battle and the fight, what are we doing?
Yeah. Can you continue on that from your perspective? Because it's like something that I'm still exploring. And when I hear like this documentary talk about it or the way that Alec will reference it, like it clicks, but it is really hard to make the switch because of how conditioned we are of the us versus they and the powers that be and the whole fucking thing. But like,
I mean,
what is this? What's your POV on this?
I know I talk about the analogy of like the meat suit thing all the time and how I literally will sometimes view myself as a robot that's just like needing some help along the way of like figuring out how to deal with certain emotions and programs. I think studying the subconscious has given me this very I don't know how to describe it. Like, I used to, when I would experience heavy emotions, and like, trust me, I can feel the depths of emotion. It's what is that's part of my human design. I'm trying to remember what
Yeah.
part of it is. One of my personality traits is like feeling very high highs and feeling very low lows. And it's actually how I navigate and learn through life, because when I'm going through those transitions from a low to a high, I pick up on like channeled wisdom on my own path, for my own path, and then also for the collective, which is usually what I'll end up sharing on my TikTok. Like I'll come out of like either like a little bit of a low or a big low, and then I pick up on the lessons and share them as I'm elevating out. But I used to feel like it was the end of the world when I was in those lows, to the point when I would get into one of them and I elongated the amount of time I would spend in them because I just couldn't get out of my own loops. Like, I would hear a story in my head and then 2 hours go by and I'm like deep into like a whole novel of this one story in my head.
Wow.
And I think where life begins to lighten up is when you have the capacity to go so deep into your own emotions without making it mean something about you, without attaching to those storylines. And I share the thing about the meat suit and pretending that we're robots, which I know that can feel like scary for some people to think about, but like sometimes I literally, I'll be feeling emotion and I'll just like, I get to detach from it because I'm like, this is just what my meat suit is experiencing right now. And maybe there's a lesson in me feeling this emotion, and it doesn't have to mean anything good or bad. It just is. And it's interesting to think about how we as humans have made up all these weird, like, little meanings and boxes and labels, to the point when we're feeling heaviness, that's bad. And when we're feeling lightness, that's good. But what if the heaviness is actually like super divine, and it's through the passing and transcendence of that heaviness where you actually literally pick up on like the exact knowledge and wisdom that your heart is needing in that situation.
Right.
So I've learned that in those moments of feeling low, one, I say this all the time, but I take care of myself the way that I would like a little kid. I'm like, okay, we're going to go on a walk today. We're going to like take a hot shower, like just doing all those little things. And when I started to do that, the amount of shame and guilt I would feel for feeling anxiety or a lower vibration just completely like started to eliminate. It was going from all the way up here, this amount of shame, to like almost none now. Like,
Right.
I'll still feel shame here and there when I'm feeling anxiety or off, but it really has shifted immensely. And I think when we find acceptance and just like the ebb and flow of life and the darkness of life, you start to see that there's like power in it. And you kind of go into your emotions with a completely new perspective of allowance and acceptance that gives you really beautiful insights. And I it's not about time and speeding up your journey through the darkness, but I have noticed that with this acceptance and like newfound appreciation for feeling highs and lows, I'm like out of them like that. Like, what used to take me literally, I'm not even kidding, like 6 months, I move through in like a day now.
Wow.
Which is why I'm so passionate about talking about navigating challenge. Like, I made a whole solo episode on it because I've created a formula that works. I literally have a step-by-step formula of like what works when you're going through those lows.
Right.
And if you're someone who feels heavily and maybe you have a lot of water in your chart, like I do, like go listen to that episode, because you got to understand that it's a gift to feel. And when our ego gets in the way, it dilutes our gifts into a challenge and let me take that back. It dilutes our gift into a fault, like something that we don't want, when in reality it's meant to be something that we're here to share with the world. Like, when I saw my human design that I literally am like, that's a gift that I have of feeling those two ends of the spectrum, I'm like, holy shit, like all the shame that I did have just completely eliminated. I'm like, fuck yeah, this is like how I'm meant to contribute to the world. So yeah, it's been a journey though.
Yeah, I really feel so strongly that we're at a point as a collective humanity as a collective consciousness that like we are repeatedly being invited to just try something different. And like I just literally I have like the feeling and the visual of the mass organism being presented with the shadows and the hardship and the real fucked up shit. Like it's it's scary, it's hard, it's heartbreaking. Like it is hard to be a human. Like it is so hard to feel and witness these things. And you're like, what the fuck is happening? Like, how is this happening? And that triggered emotion, you can fall into just despair and depression and everything is horrible and I just want to hide from it. And I really believe and I want to see how this plays out in our lifetime. And I feel like we're here to try to carry this message as like, let's just try it out and see if it helps. The message of what if we connect back to our true nature that we've lost for so long and just try that as a solution instead. This is not that fucking revolutionary, but it's just so different from what we usually are raised to think or what the fucking collective is, how it usually goes through things. And I'm like, I just think we gotta fucking try something else. Like it's that simple.
Right. And I want to talk more about what I took from the Chematica show. I wrote down some notes, and it connects to what we're saying with like, how do we as individuals contribute to this movement that's happening? And before I dive into that, I definitely want to share that if you haven't seen any of this content yet on TikTok, I follow a few creators that I really freaking resonate with. And I sent you a few videos too, Bella, but I'm curious to hear your perspective on this. But essentially, they're saying that there's this big, massive shift in consciousness that's occurring right now, where like you can picture it almost like the world is being like shaken up. And we have two options here. We either fall into fear and despair and continue to just attack each other, or we utilize this as a moment to deepen our awakening and to really come back home to ourselves. And there's some creators that are pointing out certain teachings from Dolores Cannon, who I'm not sure who it is she used to channel. She passed away a few years ago, but she channeled all this information on kind of like the Earth's journey, and she talks about how we're going to experience what we're experiencing now. I'm trying to remember what. Let me look up the book so I can say it. I don't know if it's Convoluted Universe or New Earth. The Three Waves of Volunteers and the New Earth. Yeah, so I think that may be it. So this term New Earth is essentially what a lot of spiritual leaders are referring to when we're talking about this big shift that's occurring. And you'll hear people talk about a split, because there's going to be people that remain in the fear vibration. And then there's going to be people who have been doing this work, right? And really like sinking into deep levels of compassion and love and doing all the work. And they're saying, I saw this one video of this guy who like channeled some similar information during a meditation, and he was sharing that you're going to get to a point where there's people that kind of just fall out of your reality,
right?
Which I've experienced before. Like that's definitely not a new concept to me. When you're shifting in vibration, things change in your life. You get fired from the job that you hate. You go through a relationship change. You either grow with your people and your surroundings, or you grow apart. That's just like a natural thing.
Yeah.
But on an energetic level, there are shifts that occur where this is like where my mind can get a little, our brains aren't meant to understand this information. But when you are living on a different frequency, this is what Peter and I were talking about last night. And I'll share with you some like, just some thought-provoking conversations that we were having. But when you start really feeding into those higher vibrations, and I'm not saying it in a bypassy way, like you're integrated, you're knowing your shadow, you're healing, and you start really radiating that frequency, that you're going to be living on a different planet.
Yeah.
Like a new Earth. And what we're saying with unsubscribing is essentially all of the chaos and the battling and the fighting and the forces that be, they don't even exist in your reality. You just go, you live your life, you find empowerment in the choices that you make, and then you subscribe to a new reality. And you give back to the collective in a way that you feel like you can handle, and that will really make an impact from an empowered place. And they were just saying, this guy was saying that there's going to be people that kind of just fall out of your life. Like there's going to be a shift. And it's just interesting because Peter and I had this intuitive hit to go move to Arizona. And I feel like it aligns with us, like not being energetically matched anymore with the city of LA.
Yeah.
Like something just feels off here a little bit. Like there's just a lot of chaos going around, a lot of people that are like angry all the time, and I'm like, damn, this is heavy, like
big
dense.
cities
you're talking
are
about.
Yeah, dude, a lot of people have the same feeling where it just does not resonate to be in such literally a densely populated place. It's too much.
Dense in all aspects,
in all the ways.
But I do think that cities are beautiful awakening containers, especially for sensitive people. So like when your heart is calling you to move to New York City or LA or Amsterdam, like whatever big city you want to go move to, I do think that is divinely guided because it's in those big cities where we awaken. If you're just going to go live your dream life from day one, then you're not going to awaken, right? It's the struggle, it's the hardship that causes us to evolve and raise our consciousness. So I wanted to talk a little bit about like what we can do on a personal level when it comes to doing our part in this. And I loved how in Chematica they talked about how they said cancer begins with a group of cells within a community that fail to communicate with the conscious signal of the organism. Those cells begin to grow out of control and begin to grow to other areas of the organism. So to drop into this, essentially what it's comparing to is what Bella was sharing, how the world and the earth is an organism, and that everything that's happening with the darkness and the shadows can be compared to as cancer in what we know as an organism, organism. So where we go wrong with this cancer growing and dividing and growing and dividing is that we have these two parts of ourself, right? We have the false ego, the egoic self, and then we have the true self. When we are listening to the true self, when we are listening to the callings of our soul, when we're doing the work to heal and release anything that's blocking us from our innate truth and knowing of who we truly are, we are able to tune into our intuition, to our heart space, and really make the choices and decisions from a place of alignment with nature. So when you are in alignment with your soul self and doing the things that make you happy and you feel energized and you're just leaning into the flow and current of nature, you're one with that organism.
Yeah.
And obviously this can look different in the society that we live in now because we have technology and we're advanced and we have fucking cars driving themselves on the road. And I do think there can be a balance of both those coexisting, but then there's this other side of the false ego, which we all know what that is, right? Like it's the identification as the material, as the 3D. It's like you can view us being dropped into a matrixy video game and the person that's just like taking it way too far. Like, chill, dude, this is a game.
Power,
and they're like, we gotta,
force,
gotta take over the world, gotta get all the money. Like, we gotta build this whole corporation and they can get these little workers in here and fuck the emotions of the people. Just fucking throw them in there, charge them $2 an hour. Like, relax. Like
literally like America for a bit.
Yeah. I literally feel like those are the young souls that are just like new to the game. They're like, this is how we got to survive. Like, this is it. Money, 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 money. And I'm not saying money's bad. I should take that back and say money is a very powerful thing that we can utilize to actually elevate consciousness when used in the right way. But I do think that there's a very egotistical aspect of that whole venture that is so grounded in the 3D and feels so dense and like matrixy that we're just like, what? Like, sit down.
And just chill.
I think what we need to recognize here is that our part in all of this is what you were saying before at the beginning of the episode, with us really like connecting to our true self as a form of contribution to the collective. And I think it's powerful for us to now talk about the impact that one individual person has on healing themselves and elevating themselves on a collective that may be stuck in a lower vibration. What are your thoughts on that?
How the individual makes an impact, positive impact. Yeah, the more that I've learned and then learned about my own path and then embodied my own unique path and my own gifts and everything, the more that I see how that's how we're all meant to live, and that the disconnection from that is what causes so many problems. And actually, human design, I feel like we've literally mentioned it in the past 6 episodes. But human design has taught me a lot about this, because the idea is that everybody comes here with the perfect allocation of gifts and skills and interests to effectively contribute to society and to be of service in some way. And you can kind of view it as, it's like the more people that are operating in a frictionless way, the smoother society runs and the fewer bottlenecks there are. And when you are doing the job that's meant for you, you free up like the job that's meant for somebody else. That's how like Jen and Zoe will explain the kind of like perfection of everyone's gifts and like the allocation of gifts on the planet, is when you actually surrender to and embrace what's meant for you, then you line up a little better on your path, and then there's room for somebody else to slide in where you were maybe like taking, quote unquote, taking their place because you thought that you had to be doing that job, right? So that's one way I think about it, is we just are literally a more effective society. Like everyone's in the roles that they're meant to be in when we come back to our true self and our true essence, and we go down the soul led path of whatever calls to us, right? Knowing that those callings are divine. And then I know just vibrationally that by the laws of resonance and how, just someone can affect you when they walk into a room, and us both being generators and knowing that the way that our energy is impacts the people around us, that undeniably when there's more people in an authentic vibration, it ripples out to affect other people. And yeah, I've experienced that to be wholeheartedly true for myself, is every time that I go inward and choose to become more honoring of myself, more in a true version, more authentic, shed another layer, embrace my true gifts, like be in my genius, that things around me are better. It's crazy because you're like, how is this possible? Like, I didn't actually change what's around me, but it's like, you did. Because whether it's happening in the quantum or whatever, like, this is honestly, I think as the decades go by, I think we're going to have more and more science to prove that when you make these internal shifts, it actually changes the fabric of reality around you.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, do we even want it to be scientifically proven? Like if it is
right, I don't even
proven,
care.
Then we're bringing it into the 3D and making it more matrixy, like
true, yeah.
What if us just not knowing, kind of like I always imagine a little Sims. What if like instead of trying to figure out everything, like how does this cube get here for me to build my house, like just be like, okay, I think this way and here it is, it shows up, like go with the flow, play with the matrix.
I think that works for sure for us and for a lot of people, but I do think, like, I always view science and spirituality as two sides of the same coin. And so I think if you're just giving people the people who are very logic minded, and that's actually their gift, is they're very science and logic and like 3D oriented, that then they get to access alignment and fulfillment because they've been given a manual that works for them and speaks their language.
Right.
But it's the same thing.
I guess my like dispute on that is you need to feel it in order to like actually live it.
Right.
Because if you don't experience it, it's just kind of like what we were talking about yesterday, just a bunch of knowledge in the head.
Right.
But my other concern with that is like, as you put language to something that's indescribable, you're dimming it. It's kind of like how we describe consciousness. It's like we're defining it and putting it in a box, when in reality it's really just like you can't there's no words.
Yes,
no words.
It's the asymptote. It just never actually gets to the real.
Right.
It never touches the line.
You can eliminate, but you can't define it.
Right. Yeah. That's why the delusion works. It's just fucking whatever, dude. I don't care if it's not. If you don't think it's true, it's working over here. So we're good.
You keep believing that, I'm gonna believe this.
I'm like, I'm good. Things are looking
I had
good over
something
here.
that I wanted to share when you were talking about the human design aspect of if we were all to really sink into what it is we're meant to do and best use our energy in the way that we're meant to use our energy, by looking at all these different ways of categorizing the way that human design does. And if you guys are like, I don't even know what the fuck human design is, essentially it's like a playbook for each person and the individuality that we all hold to best use our energy and our gifts in order to really feel like we're in alignment and having a successful and fulfilling and happy life. Because essentially we're all built differently, and we should not be applying a one way like rule book towards the way that we should all be functioning in this reality. And as you were talking about human design, I was imagining it with what you said before about the organs. What if like you can view like a projector as like a specific organ of humanity that's meant to be like organizing and putting things and like having that bird's eye view, because those are the people that are really good at like seeing above and mapping out certain things. And then you have the generators that are literally the organisms of Earth that are
life force,
the life force, the like it's just breaking down the organs of the Earth and seeing yourself as one of those parts of the organ. And learning about all of that has been fucking wild. But I just had that aha moment when you were talking. I was visualizing all little people like in organs.
Literally. It's another like proof of oneness.
Right.
That is cool. That is cool. I like that a lot.
I also looked up a study as you were talking, when we were talking about the vibration shifting and the impact of that. There's a study where they took 1% of a community in 1976. They did this, and they took 1% of a community and told them to practice transcendental meditation, and the crime rate in that area reduced by 16%.
Insane.
So
Project Coherence, is that what this is?
I don't know the exact name of it. I did a quick Google and it popped up as like the common questions, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's real.
Yeah, there's a whole study here.
It's well documented. I think Joe Dispenza talks about this in Superhuman, I think.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he references, I think he's maybe run a study that he's called Project Coherence. And it's the same thing where you take 1% of a city or whatever area and you have them practice meditation, and then they take notice of how it affects the city, and it literally changes the activity of the city.
It's
like,
crazy.
What?
It's crazy.
Like, that is proof in and of itself of what we're saying here.
Should I play that video? Let's see if...
Yeah.
Okay.
Here, I'm just going to like make sure
An individual vibrating at 700 on Hawkins' map of consciousness counterbalances the negativity of 70 million individuals below a level of 200. An individual at 600 counterbalances 10 million people below 200. One at 500 counterbalances 750,000 people below 200. And an individual at 300 counterbalances the negativity of 90,000 individuals below 200. So you see, your vibration may be more important than you thought. And so we cannot allow ourselves to be swept up in the hysteria of what's being perceived around us. And instead, we have to go within and cultivate a holographic version of the world we want to see. We have to hear it. We have to touch it, and we have to feel it. And then we have to hammer it into our psyche over and over and over. We have to anchor the world we want to see. We can't continue to anchor the world they want to see. We have to become relentless about holding the line and holding the space for the loving, fair, just, joyful, and peaceful world we want to see. We are now at the precipice, and so now it is time to apply your training, to be a lighthouse to everyone you come into contact with, of power, strength, compassion, stillness, and peace. It's time now to intensify our connection to each other and to the Creator, to be beyond confident in our true human power to create reality and to steer the world of the seen with what we hold fixed in our unseen realms, to deny the reality they want to see with all our soul, our heart, and our might, so that what we hold true within will propagate the without. This is not a drill. It is time. I know you can do it. I love you, and I believe in you.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean,
okay,
what better way
is
to
this?
summarize everything we just talked about?
Yeah. I think that's what we're feeling called to, is like, it's freaking time. And like the message feels so strong. And just think about the fact that we are, in a way, we're feeling the call of this message because of what we're witnessing. And so, again, it's catalyzing us to really say, we're going inward, we're doing the work, we're ascending, we're making conscious choices. And it's because of the catalyst of suffering.
Wait, what if, because of the suffering, that is causing us to turn inwards and connect to our channel, and us having this podcast is even more of a serious way to spread the messages that come through our channel? If we're going to talk about oneness, what if you could imagine the organism is trying to literally send messages through us so that it can return back to its equilibrium and rid the cancer that exists within this organism?
Yeah.
So when you are feeling your channel come through and you're feeling those intuitive hits, what it really is, if you can push the ego to the side, is a moment for us to share a message that can be a catalyst for the homeostasis of the organism. Like,
Yeah.
what if the suffering and the shaking of the earth happens so that the people feel like they have no other option but to turn inwards?
Mm-hmm.
And this is why people will be like, when the chaos is happening, it's like, go find God, go pray to Jesus. What essentially what they're getting at is to turn inwards and start connecting to Gaia, Mother Earth, the organism, really get back into our original form, right? And go with the flow and go with the grain. So I'm like, dude, I'm having realizations as we're recording this, and I'm just like, this feels so divinely guided that we're meant to record this. And I had a feeling it would be a big one.
Yeah.
And I also had a feeling that we'd be guided throughout the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it was very divinely guided that we did not record yesterday, because the energy at which I felt today was very different. And I think we were in like the perfect place for all this.
Yeah. I feel very like at peace with the message, and it's kind of cool because I definitely had a phase where I felt intimidated in a way, or a little bit nervous about sharing my POV and the things that come through me. But I'm feeling really trusting of the messages that I've been getting lately. And I think it's all related to just the leaning into the gifts, the personal genius, the alignment, the soul path, and then it creates confidence from taking action on those things. And I really feel, even if people have pushback or a different perspective or they don't agree, I'm like very ready and okay with it. It just feels very grounded, and I feel like that's what we need to be putting out.
Right. And we'll always be forced to learn that through experiences that create the opposite experience of that.
Right.
Did I say that right? Yeah. So either way, we get to embody that and also learn how to do that as we go. And the thing that's so beautiful about these communities and creating platforms and really bringing together all of the people who want to learn this information is that usually we attract on frequency. Not usually, we do. Mm-hmm. And the people that are listening to this podcast are already at that understanding of being ready to hear this information, whereas someone maybe in a different type of headspace or awareness would reject this information. And I think podcasts are very beautiful because it's longer content where you're really like, you're not going to listen to a podcast that you don't agree with. That's just like,
unless you're
but
with
TikTok
person who enjoys disagreement. But yeah,
I guess so.
But
But I don't
typically,
know.
yes. Yeah. No, generally, yes.
I
For
trust that our community's there. Are you guys there?
Yeah. Hello? Is anybody home?
But yeah, I mean, do you have any closing remarks on all this? I feel like we touched on a lot and it really flowed in a beautiful way.
No, I think that was amazing, and I'm personally really exploring the idea we talked about earlier of really understanding and taking the ownership of how we feed into these things, and whether it's just emotionally or even like on a quantum level of what happens when your particles are vibrating in a certain way and how that affects particles on the other side of the earth.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a huge piece of what we're trying to get at is, what if these things happen, and the idea that we're quote unquote complicit in them isn't to say like, oh, you are a bad person and this is your fault, but to say that also means we can contribute positively to this.
Right.
And it's happening. We're seeing the proof, if you need it or not. But
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel good.
Okay. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that end of just it's already happening. I think it's if you choose to be and subscribe in this new reality, you'll start to surround yourself with people that are in this world as well, and it will be very validating for your own path to understand that this world is very much already being created. There are very peaceful people out there that exist that are also spreading this message. So know that you're not alone. There's a whole community of Omis that are here listening with you guys.
Yes.
And yeah, I just want to say thank you guys for listening to this episode. I know these topics can feel dense, but I hope that after listening to this, you have an understanding of how you can begin to shift your relationship to the dense topics and to the density of emotions and the density of the darkness, because we are all very divinely guided and protected, and there is a very divine flow that is taking hold of all of us on this path that we don't even have to worry about. Like, we're good.
Yeah.
We're a part of an organism, and everything that's occurring is meant to unfold in a very divine way, and we just have to do our part. We just have to return back home to ourself and really find our center and our true self to contribute what we're meant to the collective, which can just be compassion for people.
Yes.
And understanding.
It's so powerful.
So if you guys enjoyed this episode, feel free to give a review. If you're watching on YouTube, throw us a comment. We'd love to start some convos with you guys. And as always, feel free to hit that subscribe button on YouTube and following button on Apple Pod and Spotify, so you can get all the latest updates on when our episodes are released. Well, they're every Wednesday, but what episodes are released. And we love you guys. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Love you guys. Bye.
Bye.